Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think some people will still be joining us, but I know Riccardo is ready. My name's Lisa Curry. I'm the State Coordinator for Australia One here in Queensland. So, and then what I wanted to also mention is that we should be going for around about an hour and a half. There is definitely going to be some question and answers. Riccardo will just open up with a general information about where he's at in regards to Queensland and the Nicklin election. So I know we have some people joining us from interstate. I saw that through some of the responses. It's great to have you here because it's always good to have the information flow throughout the country. But I'd like to let you know too, this is very much about the state election here in Queensland, and in particular the Nicklin electorate that Riccardo is running in as an independent. And we have a lovely girl called Tracy Tuckish-Thorne in Currumbin. So for those people that aren't in those electorates, what I would really appreciate is if you know people in those electorates and you are comfortable with what you've heard here this afternoon, that you share Riccardo and Tracy's details with people that you know, because this movement is definitely about people power. So the mainstream media aren't necessarily the way that we want to do this at this stage. It's the people spreading the word. I have Riccardo waiting, so I'll ask Riccardo to unmute and join us now for an introduction.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everybody for taking up or giving up your day rather for this meeting. It's a pleasure to meet you all electronically. I hope one day we get a chance to shake hands and share a bit. Opening up the floor to the electors of Nicklin in the first instance to ask any question that they may wish to ask. None of the questions that have been submitted have been pre-briefed to me, so I have no idea what you're going to ask. You'll get my honest and direct answer straight from the hip rather than a prepared statement. For those interstate who are joining us and have questions, as the questions from the Nicklin electors start to run dry, Lisa will invite you to ask again any question you might have on a specific issue, on a general issue, on a policy issue, anything at all you're happy to ask, I'm happy to answer. And so with that, let me just kick off by saying, now most of you know Australia One and know of me, but the one question is most often asked, and it's a fair question, is why am I not in the Nicklin electorate? And why am I running in Queensland? So let's take the first one first. We were planning to get to Queensland after our son finished his HSC, but with the COVID lockdown and the restriction of movements, that was made difficult. My wife suffers from multiple sclerosis, and part of her medication reduces her immunity to virtually zero, which means she is subject to or liable to just about any infection, and it would have a massive impact upon her. So it's just physically difficult or too dangerous for her to come up. I can't leave her behind because I'm her full-time carer. And and by full-time, that means full-time. And she doesn't like me saying this, but it's to the extent where I have to carry her to and from the bathroom, things like that. So it's a fairly hectic schedule we've got. So I can't leave her behind to look after the kids on her own. On top of that, we're homeschooling as well. So we've got our hands full. And so that's the reason I'm physically not in the electorate. And I apologize to the electors for that. You have every right to see me, to look me in the eye and decide for yourself whether I'm the real deal or not. But there's nothing we can do about it. The second point, why am I running in Nicklin? And that's very clear. We had a look at the supporter base around Australia, and we have many, many thousands of supporters already signed up, just waiting for us to formalise ourselves as a party so they can become members. And we just did a numbers analysis, all the electorates. And the criteria were, it had to be a winning electorate, we had to have the resources, and we have to have the supporters in the electorate to provide the boots on the ground to actually assist. And Nicklin met all those criteria. So that was the reason Nicklin was selected. It's a good electorate, it's winnable, and we have a lot of supporters on the ground that are just dying to see a change in Queensland politics. So that answers the question about why I'm running in Nicklin. So having said that as an introduction, Lisa, I'm happy to take any questions from the Nicklin electors, specific or general, and away we go.
Okay, thank you, Riccardo. Well, I thought I'd open up just with one question for you, if you like. It's from Philip in Queensland. I think Philip's here with us tonight. So I'll read that out if you don't mind. Philip had sent me an email previously and he says, I have been concerned for some time about all the groups that have formed with their own agenda and persona and the need for a strong leader to bring them all together. Some have also registered as parties. I imagine he's talking about political parties there. Will they detract from the efforts of Australia One? Is there a solution? And Riccardo, are you the leader we've been waiting for?
Now, that's a really fair question. After the last federal election where I ran as a Senate candidate, there was a lot of concern amongst the smaller groups suggesting that we should coalesce as one large group before we tried anything again. And that seemed to make sense, except for one thing. The people running the smaller parties it appeared they were more interested in holding on to their position as executives in the party rather than actually spending the time to write up a set of policy statements or a constitution and actually put together a plan for one of these groups that included terms of reference for a constitution committee, terms of reference for a policy committee, and then a timeline on a Gantt chart explaining exactly how we should progress. Well, they didn't like that idea much and they just wanted to group together. Now, that group still exists. They have no decent policy statement. They have no idea who they are, what they stand for. So we've taken a separate approach. We decided to spend a good deal of time diving deep into who we were and what we stood for. Now, it's taken a lot longer than we intended, but in its own strange way, that has been beneficial to us because as we've dived deeper into these elections, we've become more aware of some of the deeper issues at play. And these require considerable study and insight to come up with a reasonable solution. I'll give you an example, the constitutionality of our current government. Now, most of us have an idea that we have an unconstitutional government, not the least of which because the 1986 Australia Act has removed the Queen. And once again, whether you're a fan of the Queen is immaterial. It's a matter of the government breaking the rules. And they are breaking the rules on a daily basis. And so the Constitution became a major issue that we've discovered. But not only that, then we discovered that Dan Andrews in Victoria was imposing laws on the Victorians, and everybody assumed that this was unlawful. And to our horror, we have discovered that what he is doing is not actually, some of what he is doing is not actually unlawful. So this now has raised the question about what sort of country do we want to live in? We have to design it ourselves. Now, our policy is to go back to the 1901 Constitution, because that's the one that, at least that's a start point. And I wasn't going to mention this yet because I thought it was premature, but it's come to a head. And so, for example, this delay in deciding who we are and what our policies are, we'll be initiating a constitutional convention so Australians can decide for themselves exactly what sort of country they want to live in. Because even the 1901 Constitution is manifestly inadequate for a 21st century Australia, as Dan has lovingly shown us. And so this will be a long process. So we spent the time to find out who we are and what we stand for. One of the drafts of our policy statements is on our website. It is more comprehensive than any other party. It is very clear. It doesn't shy away from the difficult problems. The most recent iteration will be up soon. It's almost done. We've only got 2 issues left and it'll be up. And so will the Constitution, and therefore we can open up. So are the smaller parties a problem? Not really, because this is a Darwinian process at its best. The strongest survive and the weakest don't. And I'm happy with that, because if you can't compete as a party against the other parties, how are you going to compete against malevolent foreign powers? You've got to be tough, smart, know who you are, where you're going, how you're going to get there. Am I the leader you're waiting for? That's up to you to decide. And I mean that quite sincerely. This has never been about me. This is about saving the country. I'd rather be doing something else, but it's fallen to me to do it. And by me, it's not just me, it's my wife and a small team of extremely dedicated volunteers who have sacrificed a lot, a great deal, to bring this together, to bring us together, and to show Australians there is a way forward where they get to have their say and the politicians follow their orders, not the other way around.
Thank you, Riccardo. I forgot to mention to everybody, please, if you've got some questions, can you type them into the chat? We're taking note of each question and we'll read it out on behalf of you and do our very best to make sure we get all the questions out there. So the chat's just down the bottom center of the screen. If you click on that little box and pretend you're texting. But I've got a question already there for you, Riccardo. In regards to, does the 2% tax on transactions the A1 proposes include stock exchange trades?
Yeah, that's a good question. That relates to transactions, financial exchanges and transactions. We've been looking at that, and we have to make sure that there's two problems. We have to do this very carefully, and that's why our finance expert, and he's extremely talented, he's modeling it still to make sure two problems don't arise. Firstly, that they don't impose or don't introduce a series of steps in each transaction to make it an impossible burden on the taxpayer. Secondly, there's no point putting in a process where clever accounting tricks can remove the impost or the taxation. And we know in a minute that banks and other financial institutions will ensure that they put in, they use any number of financial accounting tricks to avoid the tax. So there's no point setting up a tax and planning on a particular income and then finding out that most of it's disappeared. So if we can, in answer to your question very specifically, if we can include the tax fairly across transactions that doesn't become a burden, then we will. But if it's a pointless one, we won't do it.
Okay, thank you, Riccardo. Right, I've got one here that I think will be really great to clear up. It's something that's been coming up lately around the Nicklin electorate, Riccardo, and it's to do with preferencing and how a deeper understanding, I think definitely for the Australian people, need to understand the preferencing system. So I've had someone say that it's a shame you were running against IMOP as they're in the same electorate. Did you take that into account, as a lot of her supporters would vote for you?
Yeah, this question indicates a quick lesson in preferences. Now do you wonder why Labor seems to get up as easily as it does? Well, it gets preferences from the Greens, but if you look carefully at a lot of the electorates, what they do is they throw up bogus independent candidates that are actually just shills. And what that means is they sound good and people of goodwill will vote for them. But what they're doing, they're just funneling votes and preferences through the Greens, then to Labor. And so it's actually in IMOP's best interest to have, and Australia One at this point, to have as many smaller parties in there as possible, because we will then create a flow of preferences to each other. For example, I've preferenced IMOP number 2. So if I don't get up, then IMOP get my preferences. But if I wasn't there, my IMOP has to win on first preference votes on their own, which means 50% plus 1, which is a mathematical impossibility for a minor party. So it's actually in IMOP's best interest. And I know IMOP were very upset with me for running in Nicklin, but it's actually to their advantage that I'm running, because if I don't get up, they get my preferences, and that can help push them up the ladder. So as many small parties against the majors is what will actually win the country back, because it's always going to be a 2-horse race until there are enough of us with the preference to get 50% plus 1.
Thank you, Riccardo. I've got one here, and I think you've partly answered it, talking about the Constitution. It says, I'm concerned Australia One still aims to fit into the existing systems. Could someone please mute their mic? Thank you. The question, Riccardo, was, I'm concerned A1 still aims to fit into the existing system and can only play a marginal role. In other words, all existing actors are unordered by the USA and formerly UK. And how can Australia One change this? Or I suppose yourself as a independent?
Sure. There's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer's giving advice to Bart. Bart's takeaway from that advice is, can't win, don't try. Well, that doesn't work. You got to try. Secondly, under normal circumstances, this would have no chance of success, because if under normal circumstances, most people are happy with Liberal and Labor and the minors don't really count. These are extraordinary times. We have an opportunity to flip it, because Liberal and Labor have been revealed for what they are. And I'm not talking about subtle interest rate changes or immigration numbers and things like that. I'm talking about foundational issues which indicate they have forfeited their right to anybody's support. And only the willfully ignorant or corrupt will look at those two parties and vote for them. And that's, I'm not trying to insult the Liberal and Labor voters, because most people don't bother looking. But we have a chance here, a rare chance in history to do this. And so do we have a chance? Yes. Will we be marginal players? No. Our intention is to become the party of government. Liberal Labor will collapse. Greens will collapse. Nationals have already collapsed. There will be a series of by-elections in the next 12 months, 2 years, and we will be competing every one of those by-elections where we have a winnable candidate, a winnable seat, the resources and the money. And George Christensen announced today, apparently, I was told, I haven't checked it myself, but I've told he's resigned. So there's going to be a federal by-election in his seat in Queensland, and we're going to be there. So win, lose or draw, we keep pushing forward. We're not going to stop. And do we have a chance to succeed? You betcha, because I don't lose. We will push forward in such a way that they cannot win. And the people we've got in this team are a unique collection of individuals in terms of their skill sets and their abilities. And we don't play by their rules. We play by our rules. When I was running for Corey Banani's Conservatives, I said to him, we should use the full-term abortion issue because it is critical to the soul of this nation. Any nation that kills its newborns has forfeited its right to be taken seriously as a civilization. And he backed away from it because it was too controversial. Well, we're pushing hard on the full-term abortion. We're pushing hard on pedophiles. We are attacking the foundations of these two corrupted parties that over 70, 80 years have been destroying our nation. And that's not a throwaway line. The new International Economic Order paper that the Senate inquiry from 1980 examined laid out how we're to destroy Australian industry so countries like South Korea and China could build up theirs. So this isn't some last minute idea. They've been destroying us for decades. And I said it before and I'll say it again, every Prime Minister, every leader of the opposition, every Senator and every lower house MP is complicit in the destruction of this nation as a sovereign state. They're complicit in covering up pedophiles and they're complicit in killing babies at birth. Now we take that message, no other message that they sell makes any difference. And today on Twitter, because I bat back on Twitter occasionally, and the nonsense that came back my way, I just pounded them and they disappeared. Even the trolls disappeared. Because when somebody says you were a baby killer, Senator Wong, you have been promoting full-term abortion since you got into Parliament. The golden girl of Labor is actually nothing but a low-grade piece of scum. Now, if ladies don't like me calling another woman scum, this is called equality. A baby killer is a baby killer. A pedophile protector is a pedophile protector, John Howard. So are we going to win? Damn right we're going to win. You know why? Because we're not playing by their bullshit rules anymore. We are playing to fight and save Australia. And just going back to that last question, am I the man you're waiting for? No. Look in the mirror. That's the man and the woman that's going to save this country. This party is being built so every one of you can stand up and take control of your electorate. Look at Tracy down in Currumbin. My God, what a fighter. And she's a woman of a certain age, businesswoman. She's lived there all her life and she's ripping the opposition apart because she's not playing their game. We're playing it our way. And I have every intention of leading this party for as long as I can to victory. And if I can't do it, then somebody else will take up the cudgel and lead it to victory. But it's our intention to become the party of government in Queensland and the party of government in Australia.
Thank you, Riccardo. Look, I have a question here, which you may have actually answered. It said, Riccardo had said in an interview with Jamal that the Queensland election is the last chance for the country. And if either he or Tracy does not get a seat, that it will be the last chance gone, basically. I'm not sure whether they were actually your words, but does this mean that if, you know, yourself or Tracy doesn't get a seat, that you'll give up altogether? I think you kind of meant just...
Absolutely. No, it's a fair question. Absolutely not. Now, many of you have heard this, but many of you won't. So let me explain it to you. The strategy for Australia One, we've said it before that our mission, Our purpose is to save Australia. To do that, I have designed a strategy which comprises 6 separate lines of operation. Now, what that means is this, and forgive me if you've heard this explanation before. When the Allies needed to invade Europe to dislodge the Nazis from Europe, they had to land at Normandy, the beaches of Normandy, but they just didn't throw a bunch of infantrymen on the beach and hope they got past the MG-42s. There was a series of operations that were separate but synchronized. For example, the resistance would blow up railway tracks, contaminate fuel supplies, interfere with production of armaments, in order to make sure the Germans' capability was degraded and they couldn't respond in time. Next, you had paratroops landing behind enemy lines well before the men on the beach arrived, and they flew in and they took bridges, crossroads, other key points to facilitate Allied movement and interfere with enemy movement. Then the Navy started the naval bombardment of the fortifications on the beach. And then the Navy then ferried the infantry to the shore, and eventually the poor bloody infantry ran up the beach and tried to take it. So the infantry running up the beach is the politics of this strategy. That's the first line of operation. It is the most visible for Australia One. The politics is the most visible, but actually least critical to our success. I have 5 other lines of operation, and not even the executive is aware of all of them. Because like every good operation, it's on a need-to-know basis. So we have 5 other lines of operation. And in fact, we could actually achieve our objective of saving this country and never, ever get anybody elected to Parliament. Now, we will be elected to Parliament and we will become the party of government, and that will accelerate the entire strategy. But worst comes to worst, and as a good military planner, you hope for the best, but plan for the worst. If the worst occurs and we never get anybody in, this moves forward for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And I've said before, this is a multi-decade project. We have an entire generation that hasn't learned history, that doesn't know math, that doesn't know science. And they are so dumbed down that any nonsense coming out of the World Health Organization run by the Ethiopian terrorist, communist terrorist, anything that organization says, they blindly believe. So you can understand now the repair job that we've got to do in Australia isn't just about getting into Parliament. That's the least issue. We have to re-establish an entire nation from the ground up. And this will take decades to do. So that's a very long answer to a short question. Do we give up? No bloody way, because I've got kids and I'll have grandkids, and I want the future of this country to be a shining example to the rest of the planet. We are going to do what nobody's ever done before, and we're going to do it better than all of them.
Thanks, Riccardo. This one is a very practical question, and one that we're getting a lot of emails about around this from the state of Queensland. There's somebody that said that that they live in mermaid waters in the Gold Coast, and who would we need to vote for to be strategic?
Yeah, that's I get a lot of that. Who do we vote for? Do you have an A1 candidate in our seat, and who do we vote for if you don't? First point is put the majors last. Don't give them your first preference. That way they don't get the payoff from the Electoral Commission. And put whomever you think, research each candidate, because not every party has people running. But just put them in the order that you personally believe that they are the best. But you'll be stuck, unfortunately, with either Liberal or Labor. If you're lucky, you might get One Nation. But it's just research your seat carefully and do the best you can. And then after that, hold them to account. Make their lives bloody miserable, because here's what an A1 government looks like. Tracy's running in Currumbin. I'm running in Nicklin. I expect Tracy to fight tooth and nail for the people of Currumbin. And so, for example, and same with me in Nicklin, tooth and nail. Now, let's say there's an electorate that the state decides it needs more power and they want a coal-fired power station. That shouldn't be dumped on an electorate that doesn't want it. That should be placed where there's an electorate that does want it, because it employs people, provides work, there might be a coal mine there, and it just fits naturally. So each A1 MP is expected to fight for their locals, not fight for the party or the state. Does that make sense? So with that in mind, whomever is elected in your seat, make their life bloody miserable and make sure they respond to you. Because they come back to you and say, oh, but the party policy is, you can tell them, well, guess what? The party isn't mentioned in the Constitution. I voted for you and I expect you to deliver what we want, because that's the way we're going to run it. So I'm sorry, there will be A1 candidates in the future, but right now there's only the two of us, and you're just going to have to do your research as best you can. But put the majors last. Send them a message that their days, the party is over.
Thanks, Riccardo. I think this one would then follow on from that. So if both yourself and Tracy are successful in your electorates in this campaign, how will things change? How will things change in Parliament?
They expect us to play by their rules. We're not going to. Just as I expect you to make your MP's life miserable, I'll make the government, whoever it is, make their life utterly miserable, to the point where they squeal in pain. They are not going to get away with a thing, because there's an agreement between Liberal, Labor, Nationals and Greens. They're basically controlled by the same organisation. They don't actually represent you. And the last thing they need is a thorn in their side speaking honestly about issues. Now, for those who watch The Arc with me and Joel Jamal, you'll notice we raise a bunch of issues that aren't in the press. And in fact, the number of issues that we raised have been taken up by the press. The Great Reset, for example, nobody was covering the Great Reset until we did. And all of a sudden, guess what? Those high-priced imposters in the mainstream media decided they were going to cover it. Now, imagine an MP. Here's the beauty of it. How does it change? See, right now, I'm just a guy, and Tracy's just a bird. But if we become MPs, my God, the world has to take us seriously, because now we have legitimacy. And when Tracy speaks, she speaks for 32,000 members of her electorate. And when I speak, I do the same. We have a legitimacy that the media cannot ignore, and they can't make fun of us. They tried it with Pauline Hanson. They tried it with Fraser Anning, and they're trying it with me. They've tried it recently with he's a white supremacist, and that's just a joke, and that's been battered down. There's a ton of evidence online that's not the case. The next thing, what's the next allegation? There's any number of allegations. They're preloading it. Extreme right-wing lunatics, that sort of thing. It's all lies. And all I'm going to do is bat it back, and make the Premier's life so bloody miserable he or she will want to resign. And just some background on the majors. I was told, and I checked it with several independent sources, the LNP has been told to run dead in this election. Let Labor win. Now, why would they do that? Because they're controlled by the same people. There's an agenda to apply, and the Labor lunatics will push it harder and faster than the LNP will, because their supporters are more likely to go along with it. So there's the truth of it. How are we going to be any different? Because I'm not playing by their rules. I'll be tearing them apart on a daily basis and bringing you, the people of Queensland, exactly the truth of what's going on in Spring Street. And it's mostly ugly, I can tell you. The deals that they do between each other, it's a con.
Thanks, Riccardo. I have a question here. It talks about the voting system. Have you heard about the voting problem where people go to vote and it's already been done? And why do they use pencils where it could be changed? Do we need to tell all people to take their own pen? What can be done to stop this voting scam?
The voting system in Australia is utterly corrupted. It has been for decades. For those of you who aren't aware, both at a federal and a state level, the 86 election with Hawke was flipped by vote fraud. And this is the Labor Party themselves. They were hooting and hollering that previously they'd managed to flip electorates, and this time they managed to flip an election. See, most marginal seats, and you'll notice on election night, they're always looking at the marginals, because the marginals are won by a few hundred votes. Now you get a busload of 20 odd staffers, and you drive them around from booth to booth to booth and get them to do multiple votes. It doesn't take much before you've actually won. And this happens. I think Mark Latham even admitted that this is common practice in the Labor Party, and it is common practice. Second, the electoral roll is corrupted, utterly corrupted, federally and state, because they link with each other. And so there are entire streets with no houses on them, and yet apparently electors live there. Now, this has all been investigated and written up in a series of books which I've showcased previously. And if you haven't seen the episode, Google The Arc with Riccardo Bosi, Arc, A-R-C, The Arc with Riccardo Bosi. It's a podcast. It's a show that Joel Jamal puts out. We've done 8 episodes. One of the episodes addressed electoral fraud. The system is utterly corrupted. The AEC and the ECQ need a bottle of Drano to go through it, because to corrupt a system, you don't need a million crooked voters. You just need one person counting the votes. And there are stories after story after story of bundles of formal votes being marked informal. This happened in the Eden Monaro by-election recently, where the scrutineers for the Liberal Party noticed that a lot of the vote counters were Labor staffers. And as they looked at the piles, there were formal Liberal votes that were marked informal and weren't counted. They reported this to Liberal headquarters, and Liberals said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We're not going to challenge it." So it's not about the vote, it's about who counts the vote, and it is completely corrupted. It needs to be completely fixed. Now, to get in, that's why I keep saying to people, we cannot afford to let this to go to preferences. The win in Currumbin and the win in Nicklin has to be so overwhelming, even the crooked counting system can't get away with it. The scrutineers can say, I can see a ton of votes there for Bosi, I can see a ton of votes there for Takak Thorn. So how could they possibly have lost? So it's got to be 50% plus plenty. It can't go to preferences. The voting system, the corrupted electoral roll, the ability to vote without ID, these are all Labor, Liberal rules. You don't think they could have changed it if they wanted to? Of course they did. And here's one last thing they did. Certainly in the federal level, I'm not sure about state, but I'm guessing it's pretty similar. In the old days, to get on the electoral roll, you had to prove that you're actually living in that area. Now, all you need is another elector that's enrolled to approve your status in that seat. How insane is that? That's how corrupted it is. That's why this process requires decades of fixing. And that's why you can't vote Liberal, Labor, National or Greens, because they put this in place. We need a new broom and a bottle of Drano to clean up the mess.
Yeah, thank you, Riccardo. I've just got one question around what's the plan or policies you have in place to bring back jobs and industry from overseas? I know this is a big one for you.
Okay, a couple of levels to this question. The first thing we do is we open up the state completely. We kill the COVID lockdown because there is no COVID crisis. It's a lie. The numbers prove it. Even the overseas numbers, the CDC in the United States and the UK, all the numbers indicate there have been very few COVID deaths. The death rate is similar to a flu season. We know that for fact. So open up the state immediately. That's point number one. Point number two, we reduce as many taxes as we can. Everything that's regressive tax. Stamp duty, capital gains, anything at all, land tax, gone. Because to create wealth, you need 3 things. You need leadership, you need labor, and you need capital. Now, we've got a ton of talented labor, hardworking workers up there. Secondly, we've got the entrepreneurs that are just dying to create something out of nothing. The one thing we're missing is the capital, because the governments, both federal and state, have been ripping it out of your pocket for years. And unfortunately, if you think you're paying somewhere between 33 and 48% tax, the truth is you're really paying between 60 and 70% tax, depending on your spending profile, because the hidden tax is built in. That's why you can't get ahead. It's not because you're lousy. It's because the system has been set up against you. So we're going to remove all the taxes. So open up the state, remove as many taxes as we can, and then remove the impediments to starting up new companies. Let the talented people of Queensland rebuild that economy in record time, and we can rebuild it. Now, we're going to have a deficit of $100 billion by June next year. That's not an accident. That was intentional. And people are saying, well, Josh Frydenberg said at the federal level, 2080 is when we can expect to pay it off. That is a gross insult to the Australian people, because I'm sure Josh is okay. His pay packet's guaranteed. The way we get around that nonsense of being in debt for the next 60 years is we create a bigger pie. We unleash the talents of Queensland and let it go. The third layer is the infrastructure required to get the state going. We're going to build seaports and airports and rail all across the state. Central Queensland has a deep water port, and it needs it because we need to get the ships in and out. If you have a look at the ports on the Queensland coast, they spend days and weeks waiting to load and unload. It is insanity. It is designed to crush the Queensland economy. So the infrastructure will be built to facilitate that. As I said, seaports, airports, and rail. Fourth part of infrastructure to grow Queensland economy. We're going to implement the Bradfield scheme, revised Bradfield scheme. Now, this has been around since 1938, and it's named after Dr. Bradfield, who was one of the engineers that designed Sydney. Long time back. Now, this was designed in 38. Now, the Liberal Labor Green cabal have known about this and never said anything until the minor party started talking about it. But we started damming the waters from Tully, build a series of dams. We can green central Queensland. So instead of having that flat brown plain out at Charters Towers, we will have more arable land than the rest of Australia put together. On top of that, we put in turbine hydropower generators along the canals and the pipes that flow the water from Tully all the way down to the New South Wales border. And each of these turbine hydro generators, it's no bigger than 1.5 meters in diameter, can generate enough electricity for a township of 2,000 families. So how's that? We're going to green central Queensland. We're going to give them hydropower. And instead of trying to pay a debt with a patch of land the size of a stamp, we get the entire Queensland landmass as much as we can as arable land. We give control of the land back to the farmers because they know how to use it best. These people aren't environmental vandals. The Greens are environmental vandals. Give it back to the farmers and let them turn it into productive, useful land. We become self-sufficient as a state in terms of water, self-sufficient in terms of power, self-sufficient in terms of food. And when you're self-sufficient, the problems overseas don't bother us anymore because we survive without it. And what we roll out in Queensland, A1 will be rolling out nationally. For all the non-Queenslanders sitting in, we've got exactly the same plan for the rest of the country. Self-reliant in every respect. And we're lucky. Australia is a continent. We have a sea-air gap, which makes it hard for bad guys to turn up. And we have enough room and resources to become completely self-reliant. And that's what we want for Australia. That way, when we need medications, we don't go cap in hand to the criminal Chinese Communist Party asking for medications. We'll have our own, thanks very much. We'll have our own silicon chip design and manufacture facilities. We will have our own everything. We'll be so powerful and strong that they'll come to us and beg us to do business with us, not the other way around. That's the economy.
Thanks, Riccardo. Sorry, I've got you jumping around here with lots of different subjects. So
That's fine.
Thank you. Look, I've got a question here, some clarification around full-term abortion. The question is, what actually do you mean by full-term abortion and how many weeks?
Latent full-term abortion. Just so we're clear, the heart starts beating at about, I think it's day 11 or 12. Okay. I'm not discussing that at this stage. Let me give you some background first. This is apparently a women's rights issue, and so you weren't allowed to discuss it. Men couldn't have an opinion. And it has been progressively ramped up by initially Emily's List, which is Penny Wong, Tanya Plibersek, and the rest of them, Julia Gillard. And their goal is to get full-term abortion on demand, Australia-wide, publicly funded. Right now, it is legal at the point of birth to kill a child. That child doesn't get a death certificate. It doesn't get a burial. It is sold as medical waste to companies who use the tissues and organs for product development. This is now legal in Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland. That's full-term abortion. Late-term abortion. Now, ladies, I hope this doesn't upset you, but here's the awful, bloody truth. Except for incest and rape, if you are pregnant, it was your choice. Now that hurts. I get it. But since Roe v. Wade, there are multiple ways that you can prevent getting pregnant. Multiple. From the morning after pill to everything else. Now I understand that some contraceptives don't work with some women. We are going to introduce testing to allow you to find out for sure which contraceptive works best for you. Because some women need very strong dosages, others get away with very low dosages. And I know of cases where women were on the pill and became pregnant, and they had to ramp up the dosage in the contraceptive pill to extremely high levels just to prevent getting pregnant. I understand that, but this is a profoundly important issue for the soul of this nation. And I'm not talking spiritual. I'm just talking about what sort of human kills a baby at birth. Because if you're not aware of it, they actually are talking about post-birth abortion. And one lunatic is saying that people shouldn't be granted personhood until the age of 2. So, ladies, you've been taken for a ride. You really have. So our policy is very clear, and we're tightening it up, because some people said you need to loosen it up. Well, no, I'm afraid we're tightening it up. After 2 weeks, you are not to have, abortions are no longer legal. Now, you can be tested, and if there are gross deformities or there is risk to the mother's life, separate set of circumstances. I understand that. We understand that. And this isn't coming from some guy. This has come from our Constitution Committee, which has men and women who have gone through this in quite some detail. But here's the point. Australians have now allowed the most draconian and grossest abortion laws in the world. So I hope you're proud of that. We have the worst laws in the world. And have you noticed those individuals in your parliament, in the Queensland Parliament, that cheered and clapped and whistled when it got through? Well, they don't do that when they pass legislation, decent legislation for the people. And yet that one was a big one. There's an agenda here, folks. If you are going to allow babies to be killed at birth, then you're going to allow anything, because there is nothing more fundamental than protecting a baby. And this isn't a woman's rights issue. This is a life issue. Because if you're going to kill a baby at birth, they're going to kill you. They are slowly watering down whatever sense of morality Australians have left. And as I said, this is a decades-long process. We have an entire generation that cannot tell right from wrong anymore. And they have to be told whether it's okay to kill a baby at birth, because they have no sense of this themselves. Life is life. It is the most precious thing any one of us has. And to treat it with such callousness and contempt, it says everything about the individual who is pushing this agenda. And I feel pity for the woman that undergoes it, because I heard a story the other day of a 72-year-old woman who still weeps for the abortion she had as a younger woman. This is not something that just goes away.
Thank you, Riccardo. I have another question here. Take a moment. There's a little bit of a long preamble to it. I've heard that we the people via the Lima Declaration are still funding China. I've heard you say you intend to put the foreign debt owed to China aside till we can improve the economy. I would rather all these deals made with China be looked at very closely. If there's any fraud, then China should suffer a penalty before any debt is paid back.
Absolutely agree with you. Let me just explain that to the people. I was asked about how we could deal with the debt. Well, whatever debt we have with China is a separate issue. Whatever debt we have anywhere, we are going to, as a result of force majeure, which means extraordinary circumstances, which mean we can't repay the debt right now. We intend to, but let's just put it to one side until we can. Then we look, exactly as your questioner has asked, we look at every deal that has gone through, and any deal that is the least bit corrupt, we might renegotiate that deal to the point we're not going to pay them. Now, let me give you an example. Nobody becomes a billionaire in China unless you are closely connected with the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party is a criminal cabal. The Chinese Communist Party has concentration camps full of Muslims. They're called the Uyghurs. These are Chinese Muslims. And they remove organs from these people because they have halal clients. They have clients in the Middle East that need halal body parts for transplants, hearts, lungs, livers. And unlike anywhere else on the planet, you can pre-order a heart, lung, or whatever you need from China. So the Middle Eastern customers get their halal organs from the Uyghur. The Falun Gong are a spiritual group that practice meditation, diet, and exercise. And they're in concentration camp, and the Chinese use them for organ harvesting as well. And you can book anything you want with China and get the transplant you need. Now, I tell you that story to demonstrate the gross criminality of the Chinese Communist Party. This is not some foreign sovereign government. These people deserve to be hung by the neck until they are dead. And the idea that a billionaire is connected with this lot and we owe them money, Well, we're going to review that very carefully and say to Mr. Billionaire, you and your family can either stay here in jail or we're going to deport you, and everything you own we now take back because you stole it from us and you work from a criminal cabal. This is similar to saying Adolf Hitler's Proprietary Limited. Let's do some deal with Adolf Hitler in 1938. The Chinese Communist Party are a criminal cabal that will be tried, found guilty, and put to death. And anything we owe them will be wiped off the slate. In fact, we're going to sue them for the damage they've done to our country. We might start with $1 trillion claim against them, and they will pay for the damage they've done to us. And in that Royal Commission into COVID, we're going to grab a whole bunch of politicians that have been in the pay of the Chinese Communist Party, and they can suffer the same fate. This is not a game anymore, folks. Consequence-free politics in Australia is dead. The people that have been damaging this nation one way or the other, whether they're Australians or foreigners, will pay, and pay dearly. So no, I'm not worried about any debt we have with anybody. We're going to be fine. So there's two parts to it. Those debts that we don't want to pay because they're criminals, we just won't. And those that we must pay, we're going to build such a big economy that we'll knock it off in no time, flat. And then we go back to having balanced budgets and we'll be in the black, as we should be.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question that there's many parts to. So it's from a gentleman that's in our region here, Riccardo. First of all, what is your stance on the lack of funding for ASIO and DoD cybersecurity, especially considering the impeding Chinese threats with trade and security breaches?
Okay. ASIO, ACES, and the parliament have been penetrated by the Chinese Communist Party and globalist forces. If you're wondering why Trump's taking so long to fix the United States, I got a bit frustrated with him too when he first took over, because I thought, come on, mate, get going, hurry up. But when you realize, and the deeper I look into this, the deeper I realize the place has been utterly corrupted. Our security services, particularly cyber capability, needs to be enhanced. That's one of our policies, to make sure that we have the capability for offensive and defensive cyber. We're going to go through them with like a dose of salts. When you've got a former prime minister telling the security agencies they need to be more pro-China, you know you've got a problem. That was what Paul Keating said. So we will review and enhance our defense capability. That includes intelligence, ASIO, ACES, and all the collection agencies, but we'll make sure that they are clean before we enhance them. And yes, they need better funding. This leads to a statement that gets a lot of pushback, even from military professionals, which makes me laugh. Our policy is to have an intimidating military. Now, for those of you who traveled overseas and lived and worked in the third world hellholes that I have, you understand that the real world isn't like, as Ross Cameron laughingly says, the HR department of the ANZ Bank. It's a mean and nasty place out there, and all they understand is deterrence. All they understand is force. So unless we have a strong deterrence, then we're going to be open up to everybody. So the military should be intimidating to our enemies, not to Australians. The military has no role in Australia except in very narrow circumstances relating to terrorism. Very narrow, because the relationship between the Australian soldier and the people should be the best it can possibly be. There should never be Australian soldiers on the streets. There is no requirement for it. The current government is authorising it, and good old comrade Dan is doing it. And if you're wondering why you're seeing Australian soldiers on the streets, it's because they are trying to normalise Australian soldiers in internal security matters. It is a police issue. It is always a police issue. And there should never be Australian soldiers on Australian streets, ever, except for Anzac Day marches. That's about it. Now, the intimidating military must intimidate everyone around. So our enemies don't come anywhere near us because they're terrified. I want them to say, we're going nowhere near Australia because the last time we touched them, we got our asses kicked. That's the purpose of deterrence. That's why you have a standing Army, Navy, Air Force and Special Operations capability, because they are terrified of us, because that's the only thing that works overseas. It sounds brutal and rude in Australia. I get that. But I can tell you, after 40 years in business and in the military, both here and overseas, the only thing that works over there is the ability to stare them down. Now, I've done that on a personal level and I've done it on an organizational level. I was facing a company of Papua New Guinean soldiers. I was let me just divert here with a bit of a story just to let you know what it's like on a personal level, and this is what we need to do on a national level. I was a young captain and I was a senior instructor of infantry wing at the Goldie River Training Depot just outside of Moresby. Spent a couple of years there. Had to re-establish that capability because their defence force was turning into a bunch of murderous thugs in uniform. And so I was training up a company of soldiers for pre-deployment for operations on Bougainville. I read the reports in the High Commission to find out how I should focus my training. And the company that I was training up, this first one that came through, their company commander was a certifiable lunatic. He got upset one night in the mess and he stormed off, got into his tribal gear and started shooting people with his bow and arrow. That was my company commander. I can promise you, whenever I saw him, I gave him a very polite salute. But the soldiers themselves were, they'd just come back from Bougainville and they'd spent their time there chewing buai, which gives them a high, and raping the nurses. And the company commander had every one of them kill somebody, man, woman, child, made no difference. So there was a blood tie that nobody would rat on the others. This is the real world. It ain't like TV, folks. It is a mean and nasty place. Now imagine that mentality at the head of an entire national defence force, because that's what you're talking about. They're the people with whom we are dealing. So we want an intimidating military, and that includes Army, Navy, Air Force, cyber, special ops, space capability to protect us from these psychopaths that have control of large armies and navies and air forces. So it's a long answer to your question, but we're going to clean up all of the services because it is penetrated by people who just aren't doing their job. And then we're going to enhance it and turn it into a defence force that'll keep everybody off our backs.
Thank you, Riccardo. So there was a second part of that question, and it was in regards to the treatment of veterans by the DVO and the general well-being. Your thoughts on that?
Yep. The best way I can describe the way they treat veterans is, imagine you've got a group that you're crazy, or you're too crazy, or you're not crazy enough. And so the DVA can look after the people that are just right. But the ones that are too crazy, not crazy enough, they just get shunted off into the psychiatric system, which is utterly broken. Now, I've received messages of requests for support from people because the veterans are not looked after. And I don't care what the Department of Veterans Affairs says, the small percentage that they manage to deal with properly is nothing compared to the great numbers that are currently suffering in psychiatric circumstances. Specific example, the Australian Army was used as guinea pigs for drug trials. The result of that drug trial, and if you want to find out the detail, I covered it in the last episode of The Ark. That was episode 8, where I read an actual SMS that I received from a digger. They gave them the drugs and they immediately started having nightmares, panic attacks, paranoia that lasted for months and months and months. This particular individual, he would be terrified in his bed at night, and he had no memory of this, but he would apparently strike and try to strangle his wife. And he woke up in the morning with no memory, and they said this was just post-traumatic stress disorder, or they said it was you're readjusting to your rapid eye movement sleep. I mean, complete rubbish and lies. They didn't follow up. They were used as guinea pigs for drug trials. The wife and he separated. And when she found out the truth of the story, she was in tears because he gave his life and their life is now utterly destroyed. And he's been abandoned by the government, Headquarters Australian Defence Force and Department of Veterans Affairs. So the DVA, it has the token retired brigadiers and people at the top, but underneath there, the actual functionaries are civilians that have no knowledge, and I've been told horrifying stories, no knowledge about what's going on. And all they do is apply a checklist. So the DVA will be revamped to make sure it is populated by soldiers, sailors, and airmen who have been through the process, know exactly what the diggers need to get through it. But even before that, we're going to make sure the diggers are looked after correctly. They're properly trained. They're not treated like guinea pigs for drug trials, for drug companies, which they were. And at the end of it, even after the veteran's death, whether it's a good death or not, We will look after the families and well after the veteran has passed, because when he or she has given their life for this country owes that wife or husband and the kids a life after that, because they have given everything. So the veterans will be much better looked after than they are, and the current crop of imbeciles who are running the Department of Veterans Affairs, I'll show them the door.
Thank you, Riccardo. There was a question there from one of the people attending in regards to they're very concerned about the proposed change in legislation to allow foreign troops and our troops to act without any liability.
Yeah. I'm going through the legislation line by line, but here's my take on it so far. There's a Defence Force brackets Enhancement Act 2020, which allows foreign troops and police to operate with immunity within Australia. Now, they're playing word games as far as I can tell. I've got to give you some background why this is a real concern. The Australian Defence Force is only allowed to deploy within Australia under very specific conditions. As a colonel in the army, I had no more right to wander down the street with a rifle than anybody else, than the local corner store owner. Any disturbance is a police matter. Now, if the police are unable to deal with it, like, for example, a very technical siege hostage situation as an act of terror, which is defined as politically motivated violence, if they are unable to handle it, then a formal process called request initiates and is executed. And a formal request goes from the police to the government. The Governor General in Council authorizes it, authorizes the Prime Minister, the Minister of Defence, and under very specific circumstances, the Defence Force is authorized to apply lethal force in resolving the problem. See, armies and police are different. Police are there to keep the peace. We're there to kill people. And you don't want that out there unless you have very specific constraints on that group. And when I worked in headquarters special ops back in the late 90s, we were very careful to make sure that there was this very clear delineation. The lunatic politicians didn't think they could just wheel the soldiers around at their behest. Now, there are two times that Defence Force will be requested to assist. One is called Defence Force Aid to the Civil Community, which is bushfire, flood and drought. So you'll have unarmed people, but you'll have people driving trucks, delivering water, delivering food. No problems with that. Defence Force Aid to the Civil Community. That's fine. That's what this bill talks about, Defence Force Aid to the Civil Community. But then they're playing silly games, because what they don't mention is Defence Force Aid to the Civil Power. Now, this is where the call out allows the soldiers to apply lethal force in resolution of an incident. Now, the excuse they are giving is that, well, we have exchanges with other armies, and let's say we have an assault capability, counter-terrorism capability, and we have the odd Brit, SAS or Commando or the US Special Forces, and they're part of a team. You want that team that works and trains together to go in and resolve the issue together, because you can't break up a team, because this is a situation where microseconds count. So there's a high level of trust required. And so they're saying, if this is required, we don't need to break up the team. So let's give them blanket immunity, foreign troops, to operate in Australia. Well, that's like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. Because if that was their real intent, what they would have is a specific request for that individual for a period of time. And the sunset clause on that shuts down the moment he gets posted out. Does that make sense? It's very specific. We're only talking small numbers. But what they've done is they've said, right, anybody, foreign military and police, are immune. Now, here's the trick. All they need to do is expand that piece of legislation to go from DFAC, which is Defence Force Aid to the Civil Community, to Defence Force Aid to the Civil Power. And all of a sudden, you've got foreign military and police on our streets with weapons. And if you don't think they're going to do that, you're not paying attention. And good old Craig Kelly was on a show the other night saying, oh, no, there's nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, folks. Give me a break. They are progressively feeding this legislation in so they can do what they want to do. And that is put military on the streets to control people. You don't believe me? This legislation is part of a plan. The forced vaccinations is part of a plan. The proof is in WA, and certainly I think in Victoria and Queensland, They passed legislation in 2016 that allows the police to hold you down and forcibly inject you with a vaccine. 2016. Now that was passed then. So in 2020, they can quickly drop the federal set of circumstances and say, we're now going to enforce a vaccine. Oh, look at that. The state legislation is already in place 4 years ago. You're being played, ladies and gentlemen. Every time the federal government, the state government passes a law, you are being played. They are working, and I hope they're listening, and I'm sure the Liberal Labor spies are paying attention. And if you are, listen up, good kids. When we have the Royal Commission and all of this, you'll be swinging from a rope until you're dead, because the defence I was only following orders won't work. It didn't work at Nuremberg, and it's not going to work now. So here's a warning to every copper, soldier, sailor, and airman. If you obey an unlawful command, which you're required to disobey, and you know that, if you obey an unlawful command, you'll be personally held responsible, and that imbecile Chief of the Defence Force, Angus Campbell, will not be able to help you because he'll be on a charge as well. This is not a game. This is serious. This is politics like this country has never seen before. So that's why there is a danger in this legislation of putting Australian troops on the streets. I only want to send them on Anzac Day, and other than that, get off the landmass and keep us safe overseas. They should not, under any circumstances, be given carte blanche. And foreign militaries, you just heard me describe what the PNG Defence Force is like. This is rapists and thugs in a cam uniform. And the terrible news, folks, is, apart from a couple of Western nations, that's what most armies around the planet are like. Now, I've lived and worked with the South Africans, the Americans especially, superb professionals. But the others, wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them.
Thank you, Riccardo. Just going on from that, we have someone just requesting your view on vaccination. See, that's a bit of a hot topic too at the moment.
Our view is this: if you want a vaccination, have a vaccination. But you should be made aware of what's in the vaccination, and you should be tested to make sure it is effective. And that vaccination should not be made available until it has undergone severe testing, including double-blind. And not one vaccination has undergone double-blind testing ever. And if you're wondering how the drug companies get away with it, they have immunity from prosecution. So if you want it, it'll be available, but it has to be proven safe before it's authorised for issue to the Australian people. If you don't want it, you shouldn't have it. And here's the lie. They keep saying that everyone has to get vaccinated because if you're not vaccinated, you're a threat to the people who are vaccinated. Now, blind Freddie can see the nonsense of that statement. If you're vaccinated, then you are an unvaccinated person with the disease is of no threat to you. And yet the Australian people are buying this nonsense. No, forced vaccination. This is Dr. Mengele. This is World War II. This is concentration camps. This is sick. Every Australian should be incandescent with rage. Now, if you wanted the vax, go for it. But I can tell you this, even that wonderful magazine, medical magazine, The Lancet, which is allegedly the high-profile medical magazine, the editor of that magazine is a communist who drives the articles in a direction that he wants, or he may have been replaced by now. So all the articles saying that vaccines don't cause autism is a complete lie. It is a lie. Autism rates have gone through the roof. Why? How is it that autism rates gone through the roof? How are all these diseases? Why are we the sickest we have ever been? Trillions of dollars spent on medication, and yet we're dying. Children are becoming autistic. Please think. There should be no forced vax, and if vaccinations are made available, and they're on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, which means you're paying for it, then I want proof. And you know what? Let's get the chief executive of GlaxoSmithKline to take the first injection. Let's get Bill Gates to take the first injection. No. The human body has a very finely tuned, perfect immunity. And if it's looked after properly, it'll do the job. Personal opinion on the last bit, but the rest of it's policy.
Okay, thank you, Riccardo. I've got some questions that keep coming up around cannabis. Now, one of them is around our policy on growing and smoking your own cannabis. And then we have another question that could lead on to that about the CBD and the THC oil, which is another area. Would you like to sort of share?
I'd love to.
Yeah.
The CBD oil, superb. Excellent potential for doing very, very good work. It balances the entire human response rather than just dealing with symptoms. Most drugs just deal with the symptoms. The CBD oil, actually, there are more receptors on cells for CBD oil than anything else in the human body. So that actual system, it reacts very well. And some excellent work coming out of Israel. They have the best stuff, the best CBD oil. Strangely enough, the one you're allowed to buy, that the Australian government allows you to buy, is actually almost ineffective and weak. It's almost like they're being paid by the big pharmaceutical companies for it not to work, so we're stuck buying the other stuff. But the actual good stuff is extremely effective, and it has very beneficial effects. It should be tested and made freely available after testing and making sure that it does what it promises to do. But the promise of the CBD oil is excellent, and it should be accelerated as quickly as we can, as should all natural therapies, because there are dozens and dozens of natural solutions to apparently insoluble problems. And we've all heard stories about the farmer that got a particular plant, rubbed it on the cancerous growth on his horse's nose, and the cancer was gone. Now, that doesn't mean you go rubbing it on your kid's shoulder, but you get them adrift. There are things that we need to investigate, but they don't have any commercial value because you can't patent natural substances. And so the big pharma's not interested in any of this being examined, but we will. There are dozens and dozens of natural remedies that need to be examined and made available to the Australian people. Marijuana for recreational smoking use, we're against it. And here's the logic. Let me ask you this, and this speaks to political freedom, and I'm big on political freedom. And if you want to know where I sit on the spectrum, I am socially conservative. I am economically liberal, as in it's your money, you keep your money. And in terms of political freedom, I'm a libertarian, as long as you don't interfere with other people. But there are limits, and here's why. Here's one of them. Marijuana, would you make ice legal? Just have a think about that for a minute. Would you make ice legal? Imagine I'm a libertarian. I say, you know what, it's my body. If I want to smoke ice, let me smoke ice. Now, as a nation, do you think we should make ice legal? My opinion is no, of course not. Why? Well, because people are damaging themselves. The cost to themselves, the cost to their families, the cost to society is too great. And just as human beings, we can't allow people to profit from the death of others. It's just wrong. And most people would agree and say, yeah, okay, so we're not going to make ice legal. And then I say, well, why not? If you think dope's, you should smoke dope but not ice, give me a logical reason why those two positions are consistent. And there is no answer. You believe the line for dope is good. You want to smoke dope and it's your body and it's your life and you're not costing anybody. Well, that's great. You believe dope's good. Other people think ice is good. So what we're talking about here is not a right, a human right. It's just an opinion. I have an opinion and you have an opinion. So let's let the science determine the facts of whether it's healthy or not, whether it's beneficial or not, or whether it's the cost to the society and the individual is too great. And when we look at that, we find out that marijuana does, in some people, cause psychosis. It does cause schizophrenia. It certainly degrades performance. Now, we've got Chinese kids whose goal in life is to become an astronaut. And I was told of a survey that most Australians just want to be a YouTuber. Folks, this is a political party with an agenda to grow our nation into a great nation, not sit back and watch our kids smoke themselves into stupidity and stupor so they can become the slaves for the Chinese Communist Party or anybody else that has the stones to actually lead their country properly. So no, we are not going to be shifted on that. The argument about, well, alcohol is legal and it does more damage. I'm not saying it's consistent. We're not going to ban alcohol. But the fact is the line's got to be drawn somewhere, and ours stops just short of marijuana. And that's where we stand. If you don't like it, that's fine too. But that's where we are.
Thanks, Riccardo. Another one around, I was going to let everybody know too that we're planning the health summit for Tuesday evening with you, and having some health professionals wanting to share information with you and discuss things. So if anyone misses out on any other health questions tonight, we'll resend the links out and hopefully you can join us then, because we do have a lot of questions here. So I've got another one. It says, hi, Riccardo, this is from Jason on the coast. Will the current healthcare, Medicare rebates and levies still stay the same?
Yeah, Medicare is a tough one. Medicare is being abused, but it's also not meeting its needs. Medicare needs a complete review. Now, the underlying question is, am I a free market lunatic when it comes to medical care, or am I a communist that requires medical care to be paid for entirely by the state? We are somewhere in the middle for historic and other reasons. Australians expect that we should look after our own and nobody should suffer medical conditions simply because they can't afford to be treated. And that's a fair thing. Australians are fairly decent people that way. So Medicare rebates and levies and assistance will remain as it is, but it'll be reviewed to make sure that it's actually meeting the needs, because in some areas they may go up. You may receive better benefits from a healthier economy, which gives us the ability to look after the people better than they currently are. We're certainly not going to ramp it back, because people have an expectation that they are looked after, and those the weakest in the country should be looked after as well. So no, the Medicare system will be enhanced, strengthened, and made better. And nobody's going to suffer as a result of any review.
Thank you, Riccardo. I'll just read it out. So this is from Susan. Does Bosi want the USA and as our ally? They must know this. This is a very important question for them.
Which US are you talking about? The deep state or the people of the United States that want to govern their country according to their constitution? Because do I want the deep state in Australia? Absolutely not. Do I want good Americans who want to run their country according to their constitution? Absolutely. I've lived and worked with Americans for many, many years overseas. The image that we have of the United States is badly distorted, criminally distorted, actually. If people think that the Americans are problems, they're not. Let me give you another story while we're at it. This speaks to the American military, because unfortunately, most Australian thinks that the American military are some cartoon-like organisation out of an Oliver Stone movie where they're fragging their officers and smoking dope 24/7. Well, let me give you a story about what they're really like. Back in '98, I was in the Middle East and I had the opportunity to fly out and land on the USS John C. Stennis, which is a nuclear carrier. And the Stennis was on operations in the Persian Gulf, and just sailing up and down, and they were running live ops over Iraq at the time. And I was only on board for 24 hours, landed on a C5, and I spent that 24 hours awake because I wanted to see and learn as much as I could. About 2 a.m, it's probably at 45 degrees, humidity is about 100%. The air is so thick and hot, it's difficult to breathe. So I went down to the hangar deck where they're servicing the F-14 Tomcats, and I'm just standing there watching. And the mechanics were servicing the F-14s, and one guy gave a bit of lip to the other guy, and the other guy gave a bit of lip back. And the young sergeant, Air Force sergeant, engineer, he wouldn't have been more than, I guess, 23, 24. He walked across, he saw what was going on, walked across and whispered in one guy, went down on one knee and spoke to the first guy, walked across to the other guy and spoke to him and just settled it down in the most professional and measured way you can imagine. Because what sort of degree of error do these mechanics get on their plane? Is near enough good enough? Absolutely not. If they cock it up, there's a $150 million aircraft that spuds in along with a pilot that's been trained for years. So they have to be very careful. And he demonstrated tremendous leadership. And so I called him across. I said, son, get over here. And he said, yes, sir. And he saluted. And I said, thanks, mate. I just want to know we're very proud to be working with you. What I saw just then was superb leadership and well done. Keep it up. And he stood a little bit taller. The guy was extremely tired, 2 a.m. He saluted, said, thank you, sir. I'll tell the men. And he did. And I gave him a wave in the good Australian way. And to put that into context, this vessel had been on operations for 6 months. The crew had not had 1 day off. 12 hours on, 12 hours off for 6 months straight. You give me an Australian workforce that'll do that. 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 6 months straight. And that was the level of professionalism and dedication these men and women had. So when you say, do I want the Americans and allies? Those guys, absolutely. Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Okay, thank you, Riccardo. A question popped up, and I want to thank everybody. We have 333 new questions that we haven't seen yet. So I'm hoping to save all those questions. You need to bear with me because I'm new to Zoom, and we'll work through them and do our very best to get some answers out, whether it's through our mail out process with Riccardo's dispatches. But there was a question, I think it's really pertinent to right now, about how hydroxychloroquine has been made illegal by our government to prescribe for other than some of the older traditional purposes.
If you wanted evidence that our governments are corrupt, that's it. Hydroxychloroquine, the anti-malarial drugs with zinc and vitamin C together, and I've been on it previously as well anyway, for other reasons. This should have been made available immediately. It wasn't, because it wasn't part of the agenda. This is the sort of thing that'll be revealed during the COVID Royal Commission, and this is the sort of thing that'll get our politicians locked up for life. It should have been trialed, it should have been distributed as quickly as possible, but that wasn't part of the agenda. And the fact that they made it illegal, to my mind, is a criminal act. And I'm sure the Royal Commission will discover that too.
Yeah, thank you, Riccardo. We've got one here moving on from there, because we've also had that Dr. Professor Barodi that came up with another protocol for COVID that was ignored by our government as well, and even appeared on One American News. So that sort of even backs up the hydroxychloroquine issue as well. So I've got somebody here that says they'd like to know how the universities can be dealt with getting funded by the millions from the Bill and Melinda Foundation, so the Gates Foundation. These people have seen the financial statements. Clearly, students are indoctrinated by those that fund their studies, i.e. the doctors' studies funded by the Bill and Melinda Foundation. As the agricultural industry is funded by this foundation also.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Any university that wishes to receive government funding will be required to meet a set of metrics, a set of standards before they get 1 cent. Now that includes things like, instead of just burdening our kids with unrepayable debts, the university has to expand its responsibility to get employment. There's no point training these kids and then leaving the debt and all care, no responsibility. So their payment will be contingent on individuals actually acquiring and holding employment for a period of time. Point number one. Point number two, any IP that is developed on the public coin belongs to the public. It doesn't belong to China, because that's where it's going at the moment. So once again, government funding will be predicated on understanding that this is publicly funded. The individual will get a share, obviously, because the individual is responsible. That's how it works. But if we put 1 cent into it, we expect to get it back. And we will prevent foreign governments from stealing our IP, because at the moment, it's all going to China. So there's a series of metrics, but that's the short answer to the question. They will be held accountable for every cent they get. And if they don't want the money, that's fine. But they will not receive money from foreign governments that are totalitarian or despotic in any respect. For example, the ANU receives money from the UAE and Qatar. Now, they won't have a Western civilization faculty, but they have one on Islamic studies funded by Qatar, which is a corrupted Islamic state. Now, how does that work? I can tell you how it works. The foreign governments look at us and laugh and say, how stupid are the Australians? How insane are they? So every university in this country that receives money will be required to meet new standards, and no institution in Australia, whether it's an educational or otherwise, will receive money from corrupt totalitarian organisations. It'll be against the law. We should not have to pay for our own destruction. It's insane.
Thank you, Riccardo. I've got one other question, but just before we do that, I'm just looking in the chat. A lady called Marie has made a comment. I'd like to make a comment about it. Riccardo is saying, no abortion, God help us. And I just thought, after your wonderful explanation about the abortion policy allowing abortion up until 2 weeks, and then after 2 weeks for certain circumstances that you gave some examples of, that Marie might need to review the policy. It's up, I think it's actually up on our policy page, because I notice people jump to the fact that you say no to it. In actual fact, it's not that. What you're talking about is full-term abortion. And also what you say, as a very motivated liberal woman I am, you're saying that if I want to have rights, you teach our children all rights come with responsibilities. So if we want rights as women to be free and to choose, there's a responsibility that comes with that. And I think that's part of that abortion policy for Australia One, to take responsibility for our bodies as well. So Marie, just take a bit more time to review the policy and you might understand what Riccardo was getting there. Sorry, I just notice that sometimes people misinterpret and have a bit of tunnel vision with that area. It's very impassioned. But I've got another question from a local lady, and your views on 5G.
Okay, 2 problems with 5G. One is health and one is security. 5G is the mechanism by which we have the Internet of everything. But the trouble with 5G on a security issue is who controls the data and the facial recognition technology that goes along with it, the ability to track you, the ability to know where you've gone, what you've done, with whom you have met, is extremely troublesome, is the best way I can say it. So the security issue of who owns the data that comes out of that and what is done with that data. This is a free society. This is not a totalitarian society. If I want to walk across the road to my mate's place, it's nobody's goddamn business whether I do so or not. That's a security issue and the data that it's held. The second aspect is to do with health. Now, the frequency at which 5G can be ramped up to, because it changes, it can be ramped up and down. The frequency it can be ramped up to damages life. This has been known for a long time. Even as a young officer in the 80s, when we received briefings, we knew that the then Soviet Union would use directed energy weapons, and they'd get a hotel room opposite the front door of the embassy, and they would aim this directed energy weapon, this basically a microwave, at the people as they're arriving and leaving the embassy. And what would happen was they would come down with flu-like symptoms. Does that sound familiar at all? Flu-like symptoms, because it's deleterious to human health. Now, I'm not saying that 5G causes the coronavirus, so just stop there if that's where you think I'm going. I'm not. But what it does is it is dangerous to health. It can be ramped up and damage life and cause problems. So 5G from a health perspective and 5G from a security perspective, neither should be allowed until both are utterly cleared. Neither have been. So an A1 government will shut down the 5G system until it is cleared for safety.
Thank you, Riccardo. We're getting close to an hour and a half, and I just wanted to get a question in here around Queensland being the sunshine state. We're a great state of opportunity. We've got a perfect climate, water, soil. How would your policy support farming to take the best advantage of our wonderful state, and your thoughts on the water rights?
Okay, farming. As I said earlier, arable land, we need to create more arable land. The farming land that we do have, the excellent land, should not be interfered with. That doesn't mean I'm against oil and gas and things like that, but it should be arranged in such a way that the two don't have to compete with each other. Point number one. Water rights. Point number two. It is unconstitutional to buy and sell water rights. This has been set up by corrupted governments, led by corrupted individuals who have been trading water rights away. It's unconstitutional. You can't do it. And even the people complaining about it, they've got an interest in it. As far as I'm concerned, it is stolen goods. So whoever bought the water rights, you better sell them now, because we're going to confiscate it. You get no compensation because you're in receipt of stolen goods, and it'll be given back to the people who control the land and use the water. The water's got to be attached to the land and the use on that land. That makes sense. In that sense, the Constitution is correct. So it's the farmer's water, and the farmer uses that water. There's a story, I remember seeing a Singaporean saying that Australia has the best water trading rights on the planet. It's fantastic, and good for you, Mr. Singapore. Well done. But I don't care what you've paid for it, because you're not going to get a cent back. We will take those water rights back. You can take us to the World Court, and we don't care, because it's an unconstitutional purchase on your part. Take it up with Malcolm Fraser and his mates that set up the Murray-Darling system and all the other water trading rights in Queensland and everybody else. Take it up with them personally, because the Australian government's not going to be held liable for some corrupted action by some corrupted Prime Minister or anybody else in Parliament. The water belongs to the people and should remain so. Just on that, going a little further. Because the water rights have been taken from farmers, or it has been made so expensive that farms were made unviable, and this certainly happened in New South Wales. I'm not aware of any in Queensland. I think, yes, I am, because I received a question from a Queenslander. The water became so expensive, the farm became unviable. And he asked me, what's our policy? And I told him, well, you had your farm made unviable by an illegal act, by an illegal government. Not your fault. It was stolen from you. So you're going to get your land back at no cost to you. Simple. It's as simple as that. And the bastards that stole it will pay. So if a farmer's lost his or her farm because the water was made too expensive, and in one case it went from $60 a gigalitre to $600 a gigalitre, and it just was unviable. If that occurred, they get their land back, no questions asked, because it was stolen from them. And like all stolen goods, it's returned to the owner that lost it in the first place.
Thank you, Riccardo. I'm aware that we have quite a few people in Victoria on tonight, and there's lots of questions about any advice for them, and also a message from Ness, and that's in regards to who would be initiating the inquiry into COVID. I think given that most of these people are suffering more so from the lockdowns in Victoria.
It'll be one of the first things we do in Queensland when Tracy and I get in. We'll be demanding an inquiry into COVID at the state level. And then as A1 becomes the government around the country, we'll be pushing it further as well. And we'll make it a demand on the government. If they want, for example, let's say that Tracy and I have the balance of power in the Queensland Parliament. Wouldn't that be lovely? Well, they won't be buying us off, I can tell you that, because one of the things that we'll be demanding will be an inquiry into COVID and how it was managed in Queensland. And as we get people in Vic and New South Wales and WA and the rest of the states, we'll be doing the same. And then we'll do a federal one as well. But what you should be doing in Victoria, well done, Vic, you stood up and you saw that they realised that they couldn't contain you. Numbers are strength. They know that there aren't enough police and prisons to stop a large crowd. Peaceful, large crowd. Yes, I saw half a dozen cops arrest a guy on a bike today. Well done, fellas. They're funny. They can arrest you for a Facebook post, but they can't find pedophiles and corrupt politicians and judges. Isn't that fascinating? Well done, VicPol. You champions. You absolute bloody champions. Half a dozen of you. Good. Numbers. They cannot contain thousands and thousands and thousands. That's the best advice I can give in Vic. The other advice is join A1, start setting up your supporter groups. When we become a party, they become the branches. That way we can start immediately pressing for change in a formalized, recognized way.
Thank you, Riccardo. I just thought we might be able to round off with this question, if it works for you. If you were to be successful and Tracy, so they're actually saying if A1, Australia 1 wins, what is the future plan to expand into other states? Who can run on behalf of A1? And this person's thinking that they would like to run as a member, but only on behalf of Australia 1. So there's a bit of a big question there, but it might.
Okay. The process now for you sign up as a supporter, get your working with children's check. That's mandatory, first step. That's the first hurdle. If you don't want to get your working with children's check, or in Queensland, the blue card, don't bother going any further. We're not going to work with anybody that doesn't get checked out. The next priority is to build the party. So you set up a group, 5 minimum, 30 maximum, set up a supporter group, And your goal is to organize yourselves and start building the party, start letterbox dropping, spreading the word to build this massive party. We already have, and I can't give you the exact number, but it's over 5,000, but we have thousands and thousands and thousands of supporters around the country, and we're not even a party yet. We have state coordinators who are organizing them. But basically, to get to your most important point, if you wish to represent the party, here's how it works. You must earn that right. The headquarters, the party leadership does not appoint candidates. You pick your candidate. So get in there now. And the sort of people we want, someone like Tracy, who's running in Currumbin. Now, Tracy is a local. They know her. They love her. She's got a history there. And when they vote for her because they know her, not because it's got an A1 near her name. And that's what we want from all our candidates around the country. We want the sort of person who's been working the sausage sizzle at Bunnings every weekend to raise money for the swing set for the kids in the cancer ward. And so when election time comes around, they say, that's Jacko. He's always down at Bunnings. I know you, mate. What are you doing here? Oh, I'm running for, good on you, mate. I'll vote for you. Because they know, like, and trust the individual. They're the people we want. I don't want professional politicians. I certainly don't want somebody who's been in the game for 30 years. I want locals who live and work and are respected, known, liked, and trusted by the members in their community who serve their community. Because once the way their candidates are selected, it will be this. All the branches get together, all the people that want to represent that electorate stand up, and it's like a primary. You get up there and you'll be cleared by the organisation and make sure we don't have spivs and crooks in there.
Going to get you a drink.
And yeah, I love a drink. Thanks, mate.
Oh.
Sorry. I'll just go mute.
Okay, so we'll have the organisation will vet the potential candidates to make sure there's no problem children in there. And then it's up to them to sell themselves to their actual electorate. And it'll be a series of primaries. And whoever wins that primary has won the right to represent their electorate. So there's no gift. Because I've received a lot of calls from people. I've got $50,000. I got $100,000. I'll throw it to you. And I just want some policies that I like, or I'd like to be a candidate. And I say to them, look, thank you very much for that, but you've got to earn the right of your members to be the candidate. And you've got to earn that right by serving the people in your electorate. That's the way it works. And then after that, let's say you're selected as the candidate. And if you turn out to be a problem, you can be recalled, because we're going to have recall elections in the party, which means, and this applies to executives within the party too. And then in time, we're going to introduce this nationwide as when we're the government. We're going to have recall elections in Australia. Hopefully it'll be a part of our new constitution. And any MP can be recalled. Let's say the threshold is, say, 20% of the electorate don't like what you're doing. You have to recontest your seat because you can be sacked. So what happens now is that an MP makes all sorts of promises, a candidate makes promises, becomes an MP, and then ignores you for 3 years. Then comes back 3 years later and says, oh, I know what. Look, I couldn't do it this term, but I'll do it next term for sure. Well, no. What we're going to do is this. If they fail to make promises and fail to meet those promises, and if 20% of the electorate say, let's just pick the number, 20% decide that this individual is a busted flush, he faces recall. He has to recontest that election. This makes that MP responsive to the people 24/7, 365, rather than being responsive to the power brokers and spivs and crooks that are running the party organisation. You get to control your MP 24/7, 365. So in answer to your question, how do I get involved? That's it. Sign up as a supporter, get you working with Children's Check, set up a supporter group, minimum 5, maximum 30. When we become a party, then we're going to start looking for potential candidates. Make sure you serve your community, get known, liked, and trusted. And you can't stack the branches. We're setting up a way that stacking the branch won't work, because you'll get sacked, and you'll be sacked in a minute if you try it. And then you become the candidate, and then you become the member, and your job is to continue to serve your electorate. Now, if there are two electorates where the two electorates want something different, it's within the boundaries of the party policy that they want a different solution, then I expect those two MPs to fight for their electorate. I don't expect them to compromise. That's the way it's supposed to work, and we'll find a way around the solutions, because the people should control their electorate and their MP, and that's the strength of this system. It makes it really hard then for corporations, crooks, you name it, globalists, communists, Islamists. It makes it hard to control because the party doesn't control the electorates, the people do. And that's it.
Thank you, Riccardo. Well, we've sort of reached our hour and a half. There are lots of questions, but a lot of comments that are just clarifying what you said. So
Lisa, I'm happy to keep going for as long as people want to be here. I'm happy to keep answering questions.
Okay, I've got a couple of other questions here. Can we get Serco out of Australia?
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please. Okay, for those who don't know, Serco is a firm, a global firm that provides a lot of the back-end services, particularly to the Defence Force. But it's how can I say this nicely? It's a company that I think would be better off outside of Australia and us not relying upon Serco. Now, the way we're going to solve this problem is this. In the old days, the Defence Force used to have its back-end operations done by military personnel, cooks, and people like that, let's say. That's one that disappeared very quickly. And it was cheaper, apparently, to outsource it. Now, that made some sort of sense. But when you're deploying overseas, you need cooks, you need bottle washers, you need all these back-end services done. And so we're going to reinvent the Defence Force so it can deploy and become independent of high-priced, overpriced private enterprises, if that makes sense. Now, there are multiple benefits to this. It makes us more independent of anybody, and that self-reliance is utterly critical, particularly in the defence arena. Secondly, it enhances the defence capability in terms of raising the standards of the average Australian young man and woman that's looking for a life of adventure and getting real skills. Because all of a sudden, there are many more employment opportunities for Australians. And just about every soldier, sailor, and airman that has served knows that it's an incredible opportunity and great start to life. And so the more people we have serving the Defence Force, the better the Defence Force is and the better the country is. And on top of that, we're going to give all sorts of advantages to people. If they do serve in the Defence Force, then we can pick up the tab for their university degree or their trade if they want to trade, for example. And so there's multiple parts to this particular question. I don't want Serco in Australia anymore. And I know a lot of people don't. It's going, and we're going to enhance our capability at the same time.
Okay, thanks, Riccardo. I've got another question here. Mr. Bosi, what is your view about the major parties' bipartisanship on international relations?
Well, it's easy to be bipartisan in international relations when you have the same people giving both parties the same orders. We should have an independent foreign policy, independent from every other country on the planet. Now, we have good friends that we need very close relations with, but that doesn't mean we just turn up at a drop of a hat. We have an area of a section of the globe that's in our interest, and we should be actively involved in our area of the globe. Should we go further afield? Yeah, occasionally, if it's necessary, no problem. But here's a question. Why have Australian soldiers been operating in Afghanistan? Now, if you believe Koshi, that imbecile on Channel 7, he actually said in 2007, and the reason I can remember this 13 years later, it was such a dumb thing to say that I actually stopped shaving and I walked out and stuck my head out and said, did I hear what I thought I just heard? And he said, we were in Afghanistan because it was a women's rights issue. Really? Well, did you know that in Afghanistan, we've been installing an Islamic republic where they stone women to death for adultery if they get raped, where they play what's called bachi-bazi, which is called boy games, where the saying goes like this, women are for children and boys are for fun. So, should we have an independent foreign policy? Absolutely. And I can tell you it's independent of the Islamists, it's independent of the Chinese Communist Party, and it's independent of the globalists and the corporations and everybody else. Because our foreign policy will be for Australia and Australia's interest and nobody else's. And the fact that the Liberal and Labor are so close on this just tells you that they're being paid by the same people. Just like this COVID nonsense. Why are the unions silent? This is an organisation that has and will bring Australia to an absolute grinding halt a week before Christmas, and yet the unions have said nothing. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a fan of good unions that look after their members. I'm very strong on unions and union membership, particularly two in Queensland, one of them being a new nurses union because they got sick of the old nurses union because they were being run by the ALP and there was a political agenda there and they weren't looking after the members. So the Queensland nurses says we're going to start our own and we're going to focus on the well-being of our members. So don't get me wrong. I'm a big fan of protecting the workers. But the bullshit unions that have said nothing about COVID and are destroying this nation, that's enough to tell you that they're all on the same side and it's not on the side of the Australians.
Thanks, Riccardo. There's a question about the education system needing an overhaul, that children are coming out very unprepared for work and life.
My wife and I are homeschooling our own kids as a result of the appalling education system. Kazakhstan has better numeracy and literacy skills than Australia. Not sure if you know that. It is so messed up. It is so messed up that our kids are well behind. The curriculum is bad. The teaching, the standards of teachers are appalling. In fact, there was one statement that was made that the education department needed to increase, or somebody wanted to increase the maths score for entering into teachers' college for maths teachers. And the union came back and said, well, you can't do that. You won't get enough people in. So they are allowing teachers, teaching students who can't do maths to teach maths. This is one of those reasons why it's going to take us decades to fix this problem. We've got to go back to basics, fundamentals at an early start, and make sure the kids can read, write, know their history, know their science, know their social studies, all that sort of stuff, but get it right. Instead of teaching masturbation, which is being pushed by the education departments around the country to toddlers. There is a sickness that has penetrated every aspect of our country, particularly through the education department, that needs to be rooted out. We're homeschooling our kids. We voted with our feet. And with all our responsibilities and all the difficulty that entails, there's no way I'd give our kids back to another school, not without knowing exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. There is a pressing need to compel schools to start delivering proper results. Now, this is a public and the private sector as well, because there's a bishop down in Sydney, the Bishop of Parramatta, the Archdiocese of Parramatta, who dictated that they shouldn't do times tables till they're in grade 4. Grade 4. How insane is that? So the fact is, it needs to be completely rebuilt. I don't know who the Secretary of the Department of Education in Queensland is yet. I'm sorry, I probably should know, but I can tell you this. Guess who the Secretary of the Department of Education in New South Wales is? Mark Scott. Who's Mark Scott? Former Managing Director of the ABC. Well, what the bloody hell does he know about running an education department? It's almost like they get their key people into key spots to push their key agenda. Does that make sense? It certainly does to me. And whoever the Minister for Education is, if he thinks he's running the department or if she thinks she's running the department, they're not. All of this will be fixed. It's the curriculum. It's the teaching standards. It's the teachers. It's the teachers' union. It's the schools. There is so much to this that has been degraded, folks. And that's why, as I said, this is going to take decades to fix, but we've got to start now. And the poor kids that have come through that system and can't read and write and are still at home twiddling their thumbs trying to figure out what to do with their $30,000 debt for a degree that can't give them a job, we have to help them out. We can't leave them behind.
Thanks, Riccardo. I've got a question here from Daryl. He's in our electorate and he says, hi, Riccardo. I don't believe Australia is prepared for what's coming in early 2021 in regards to the economic damage done to our supply chain. What's your opinion on how we should prepare for a possible depression and the effects to our supply chain, which he means food, etc.?
Yeah, this is the sad part of the night, folks. I'm sorry. They will collapse the economy intentionally. And if you think that the fights in Coles and Woolies for the toilet paper were bad, watch this space. They don't care. They will compel compliance from you for you to feed your kids. Do your best. Do your best. That's all I can say. Because what's coming is awful. If you think it's bad so far, what do they say? Oh, this will only be 2 more weeks. Oh, maybe 2 more weeks. Or maybe 3 more months. Or maybe another month. Don't believe a word of it. Don't believe a word of it. Get yourselves ready. Stock up. And be ready for some bad times.
Yeah, thank you, Riccardo. And in the meanwhile, I think by building these branches and support or Australia One supporter groups is certainly going to help us through that, at least by mixing with like-minded Australians. We're getting a lot of people that are making just a lot of comments in agreement. There has been questions around you tagging Donald Trump, and then a second question would be, is Trump aware of you and your agenda?
I'm a big fan of Donald Trump in that he is doing what nobody has done in the US or could have done in the US. So whether people like him or not, I don't care. Grow up. The difficulty that he faces in doing that job, as whatever he ends up doing, is extraordinary. The fact that he's done it. It is extremely difficult. He's making good progress, and we hope he does well. I know this wasn't part of the question, but let me give you my opinion. We can't wait for Donald Trump to save us because it's not his job to save us. It's our job to save us. We must do it. We must become self-reliant. Has he heard of me? I don't know. I sent him a copy of my book, which I dedicated to him. And the printed dedication reads along the lines of, don't worry about it. But I wrote in the cover of the book, I thanked him. In saving the United States, he saved the world. Whether he's received it or not, I'm not quite sure. Does he know about me? It doesn't matter. What matters is that we get off our collective backsides and start taking control of this country. We can't outsource this anymore. I hope that Trump succeeds in the US, but only because if the US goes down economically, let's say, it'll go down militarily. If it goes down militarily, we're at the mercy of the worst psychopaths on the planet. And I have lived and worked with it. I have a lived experience of these people. And if you've never actually lived and worked with a psychopath, it's hard to conceive of the depravity from our perspective that they are capable of. They're not depraved from their perspective because they have no moral center. They're just missing that gene. They're missing that whatever it is. It's like asking a colorblind person to spot the color red. They just can't see it. That any moral individual would be repulsed by what they're capable of. And in the coming months, maybe some truths will come out about what's been going on in the US, and maybe some truths will be coming out about how Australia's been involved in that. And to an extent, I hope it does, because we need Australia to wake up, and they need to see for themselves the depravity of these people. And when that happens, we'll be ready. And this is what, as Lisa said, get into your supporter group, start building the organization, because when the collapse comes, the majority of Australians are going to need something and somebody to hang on to, because it's going to be utterly destabilizing for them. The shock will be terrifying. But if Australia One is up and running and we're organized and we have branches and we have branch presidents who know what they're doing and we have candidates who know what they're doing, it'll make that transition through this very difficult phase we're about to enter. It'll make that transition so much easier. And so this appeal to sign up, join up, and prepare for the flood. The analogy I use, there's a flood coming, but there's no point standing on the hill looking at the storm clouds. Get down in the valley, pick up a hammer and nail and a piece of wood, help us build this ark, because when the flood comes, we're going to need a boat to sit in and sail away and collect the rest. So Trump, I hope he does well. I hope he succeeds. The world depends upon it, not just the United States. If he does, then so do we. But we have to do it ourselves.
Yeah, thank you, Riccardo. So with that, there is just one question or a few questions about when will the party be registered. I know there's the Queensland election and then there's also the federal side. If you could just briefly provide that.
Sure. Yeah, this has been utter frustration for me and everybody else. We've only got 2 sections of the policy to tidy up. The lawyers have got the Constitution. And just on that, just so you're aware, we sought out some boutique lawyers because we need specialist lawyers on this. And one by one, they all fell away, and they indicated that, oh, we can't help you now, we can't help you now, we can't help you now. Now, you can speculate as to why high-priced lawyers knock back a high-priced job. But all of a sudden, they lost interest in helping us, which I can't imagine why. But anyway, we finally found a couple of lawyers, and we're getting them to look at it. Once that's done, the application goes in, and we'll be calling for members immediately. So this could be done as quickly as the next 4 weeks. I'm hoping less than that. And that way we can start calling for members. You pay your $100 to join up, and then we can get to work. So hopefully that'll be done. What's this? October, November? Certainly next month. Just on that, there has been, I think I mentioned it earlier, an accidental but advantageous side to the delay in terms of what we've learnt about the politics. And I mentioned earlier about some of the policies. But even the Constitution itself, we've had some incidents within the party which indicated we needed to tighten up some of the rules in terms of what the executive can and can't do and what members are required to do and how people should behave and not behave. So in its own way, it's frustrated us, but it has helped to some degree anyway. But anyway, next month should be up and running.
Thank you, Riccardo. I think at the moment we're having mainly people just making comments now, so we've covered a great range of questions. I'm happy just to finish off with a talk about people focusing on Nickland and on Currumbin. So other than that, I think we've pretty much covered everyone's questions that we can find anyway. So
yeah, just on Nickland, the push of all the investment and interest towards the coast and away from the hinterland, and it's simple things like parking and space and shop fronts. These are not difficult problems to solve if you have someone the will to do it. There's always money pushing issues in electorates, and politicians tend to respond to money. Well, there are solutions to that in terms of transport, movement in and out of the area. One of the other questions is transport from the Sunshine Coast to Brisbane and down to the Gold Coast. One of the solutions that we've been toying with is, because we don't want to destroy what makes Queensland beautiful, and that's the land up there, the climate, the weather. It's just fantastic. Previously, solutions have been to build unattractive freeways, which are going to be chock-a-block within 6 months anyway. And so we've been toying with the idea of an underground to get people to and from quickly without spoiling the scenery and without interfering with the quality of life of the people. And so there are solutions to those very specific Nickland problems that just require a bit of imagination and a few extra dollars, and they can be done. This is not difficult. It's always a zero-sum game with politicians because they don't have the influence because they're beholden to a party. Well, our members will be beholden to their people, and we expect them to fight for them and actually make their quality of life within their electorate as good as it possibly can be. So those smaller issues, but still fundamentally important issues, can be solved reasonably easily with the right will.
Yeah. Thank you, Riccardo. Well, I think that's pretty much all of the questions that relate to this evening. So what have we got there? Oh, we've got somebody that said they're getting a hashtag Rick for PM trending for you, Riccardo. There's some very lovely comments and some amazing people there in the background. I apologise if I've missed you, but we have done our best to get through it all. And a lot of the things that are being brought up around free speech, I think that our policy document online, Riccardo, has about the political freedoms, doesn't it, with the free speech?
Yeah, free speech is fundamental, and I'll be covering this next week on the next episode of The Arc, because there's a religious freedom bill being pushed by Mark Latham, One Nation Mark Latham in New South Wales. It is extremely dangerous because religious freedom is one thing, and there's a technical constitutional issue here which I'll explain later. But if we're not careful, and they are pushing for it now, They want to introduce blasphemy laws, essentially. You can't, vilification, they call them vilification laws, but they're basically blasphemy laws. So we're going to go back to Middle Ages in the Middle East if we're not careful. I'm almost a free speech libertarian. You should be able to say what you say and be free to say it. Because if you can't say it, you can't decide, you can't discuss, you can't learn. It is fundamental to everything that we have. And that's why it's the First Amendment to the US Constitution, was the right to free speech, because it is foundational to our country. And they're going to slip in laws which on the surface look sound, but in reality are more constraints on you as individuals. You should be able to say what you want to say the way you want to say it. And if someone's offended, well, toughen up, princess. That's life. And this is the example I'm going to use next week. Some of you might remember there was a work of art displayed in Melbourne some years ago called Piss Christ. It was a crucifix in a jar of urine. And this was allegedly a work of art. Now, the Christians were understandably upset, but that's it, they were upset. Yet on the other hand, if I drew a picture of Muhammad, apparently I should be beheaded. Now, we get to choose in this country how we choose to live. Now, I've got no problem with I've said this before, I'll say it again. I have no problem with Muslims. Muslims who want to apply the religious elements of their faith. This is the 5 pillars, which is the fasting during Ramadan, or the Hajj, which is going to Mecca once in your life if you can afford it, or charity, or praying 5 times a day. The religious aspects of their religion, I've got no problem. But the political Islam and the cultural Islam, which are inconsistent with Australian law, we don't accept. And yet they wrap it up in their entire package into a religion, and they want religious freedom. So you can see the danger here. We have to start deciding what constitutes a religion. We have to start deciding as a nation what we want, because we are not required to follow the dictates of foreign governments and foreign religions and foreign anybody. That's up to us to decide what constitutes freedom. As far as I'm concerned, I love the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, the right to free speech. You should be able to say what you want to say. And if someone's offended by it, well, tough. So freedom of speech, 18C, Section 18C, the Racial Discrimination Act is gone. That's out. The moment we get a chance, that's gone.
Thank you, Riccardo. I just hope you don't mind me sharing, but I've actually witnessed Riccardo teaching his own children about not being offended by what other people say. It's their issue, not theirs. So the man lives by his word. It's not just the words here today. So thank you for that. Well, I think, Riccardo, we've just got lots of people starting to sign off now, and I can allow you to go. I just wanted to talk about, I allow you to go, you have my permission. Sorry. I sound like a mum, sorry.
Right, well, in that case, I'll take my leave now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for your interest. Please understand the success of this movement depends on each and every one of you becoming more involved in your electorate. Find out what your state electorate is. That's your area of operations. Get involved, get known, because you are the men and women who will save this country. Look in the mirror. That's the one. And some of you grey-haired old folks out there, there's still a fight to be had. I'm 60 years of age, and I'm planning on being around for another 40 years. So there's a fight to be had, and we don't care what colour your hair is or what colour your skin is. If you're for Australia, we're for you. And so thank you very much. I wish you all well. Hope to see you on the sign-up book. And Lisa, thank you very much to you and your team doing a sterling job in Nicklin, and Tracy, thank you to you and your team in Currumbin doing a brilliant job down there. Tracy, by the way, what a feisty candidate. She's doing a brilliant job. She's your perfect A1 candidate. She's not a politician and she loves her country. And that's what we're looking for. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Lisa, thanks very much. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Yeah. Well done, Riccardo.